your speaker in this meeting, with Professor Charlier from the University of Liège. Corinne Charlier is full professor of toxicological chemistry and head of the Laboratory of Clinical, Forensic, Environmental and Occupational Toxicology at UFG. She is member of ARV, and her lecture is entitled Pharmacological and Toxicological Aspects of Performance-Enhancing Substances.
Thank you, Professor Corinne. It's very nice to be here this morning to present this talk about pharmacological and toxicological aspects of performance-enhancing substances. As it was just said, organized sport has a history dating back to ancient Greece. However, in the early 20th century, pharmaceutical companies expanded the production of medicines available to correct health problems, and athletes were free to access whatever substance were available, since there was very little regulation in sport. Amphetamines were synthetically produced in 1920. In the same year, the use of performance-enhancing drugs in sport was recognized as a problem when the International Amateur Athletic Federation banned the use of stimulants, but without any availability of a test to detect that use. Anabolic steroids were used since the 50s, when this class of drugs were produced on a large scale. 20 years later, in a paper published in 1973, Silvester proposed a survey of track and field athletes who participated in the 1972 Olympic Games, and he found that 68% of the participants reported prior anabolic steroid use. New pharmacological drugs appeared on the market in the 60s. Also, it is difficult to attribute mortality or morbidity directly to drug use. There was a number of deaths of athletes associated with doping in the 60s. In 1960, the Danish cyclist Knud Jensen died during the Summer Olympics in Rome. The Union Cycliste Internationale and the Fédération Internationale de Football Association were among the first international sport federations to introduce doping tests in their respective world championships in the 60s. In 1967, Tom Simpson, the British cyclist, died from a cardiac arrest during the Tour de France at the famous Mont Ventoux because he used amphetamine. As a consequence, the International Olympic Committee formed a medical commission to deal with the perceived increase in drugs and other performance-enhancing substances that not only affected the evenness of the playing field, but also exposed the athletes to health risk. The most significant event in the 80s occurred in 1988, when the Canadian athlete Ben Johnson was tested positive for an anabolic steroid stanozolol during the Summer Olympics in Seoul. The IOC recruited a number of laboratories to carry out drug testing all over the world. But 1998 seemed to be a very special year in the story of doping in sport. The scandal began very early in the year, in January, when a Chinese swimmer was stopped during a routine custom check in Australia. She had vials of human growth hormone in her luggage. In the same year, evidence of systematic doping was discovered during the Tour de France cycling race. It was the beginning of the Festina affair. On September 21, the world record-setting sprinter Florence Griffith Joyner died in her sleep She was the 1998 Olympic gold medalist, and she was 38. The media coverage of her death concentrated on one question. Was it possible that the use of performance-enhancing drugs contributed to her death? Finally, the World Anti-Doping Agency was created in 1999 to promote, coordinate, and monitor the fight against doping. Since this period, WADA has worked closely with international enforcement agencies to uncover doping activities. But new pharmacological classes continued to appear on the market, and especially on the web, as it is the case in 2008 for synthetic cannabinoids. And the story goes on. In 2012, Lance Armstrong was finally convicted of doping, based on the violation of anti-doping rules, since his test never reported the presence of a prohibited substance. But the UCI removed 7 Tours de France of his palmarès, and Lance Armstrong was lifetime banned. Among the key to an effective anti-doping program is the legal definition of doping, but also the publication of a prohibited list, because it clearly outlines what is deemed to be unacceptable both in and out of competition. The prohibited list is an involving document. It includes substances and methods. I will only focus on substances, and some of the next speakers will talk about some doping methods, for example, genetic doping. According to the WADA, the prohibited substances can be divided into 3 major classes. Drugs that are prohibited at all times, in and out of competition. Drugs prohibited in competition. And finally, drugs prohibited in particular sports only. The 4 classes can be divided into 11 categories, from S0 to S5 for substances prohibited at all times, from S6 to S9 for substances prohibited in competition, and P1 and P2 for substances prohibited in particular sports only. The S0 group includes the non-approved substances. That means any pharmacological substance which is not addressed in the list, with no current approval by any governmental regulatory health authority for human therapeutic use. You can find, for example, in the S0 group, drugs under preclinical phase. The S1 group is the group of anabolic agents. That means anabolic androgenic steroids and other anabolic agents. Anabolic steroids, as it is the case for all the performance-enhancing drugs, are chemicals that will improve in any way, in any manner, the sportive performance of humans. The major effects are summarized on the slides. It can be benefit for muscle size or strength, with increased synthesis of protein, decreased protein catabolism, improvement of muscle oxygenation, for example. They can have metabolic effects, with increased lipolysis or sparing glucose effects. The drugs can have androgenic effects or be bronchodilatators. They can induce the secretion of cortisone by the cortex, inducing anti-inflammatory and antalgic effect. Drugs can have psychoanalytic and behavioral effect, leading to an increase in endurance. Hemodilution can be useful to alter the blood parameter used to detect blood doping. And finally, chemicals can modify urinary excretion of doping products. Of course, the chemicals can have more than one pharmacological effect. Anabolic anabolic androgenic steroids are compounds that are structurally and functionally related to testosterone. They can be distinguished based on the fact that they are endogenously produced and exogenously administered, as it is the case for testosterone, or synthetically produced, as it is the case, for example, for nandrolone. Nearer to anabolic androgenic steroids, the S1 group also includes other anabolic agents, clenbuterol, a beta-2 agonist, timolol with oestrogenic properties, or the new selective androgen receptor modulators that will induce anabolic effects rather than androgen effects. Anabolic steroids and related are the class of drugs the most misused by people who are looking for a boost in muscle performance. To illustrate doping with anabolic agents, I have selected two stories. In 1971, during the Tour de France, Joop Zoetemelk was tested positive for nandrolone, but he was not punished, since the doping list didn't exist yet. As I already shown you in my introduction, in 1988 in Seoul, Ben Johnson was tested positive for stanozolol in a routine post-competition drug test. Ben Johnson was punished, and he was subsequently stripped of his medal. The S2 group is the group of peptide hormones, growth factors, related substances, and mimetics. Most of these hormones naturally occur in the body. Erythropoietin, erythropoietin receptor agonist, and hypoxia-inducible factor stabilizers or activators, like can be carbon monoxide, argon, or xenon, will increase the oxygen uptake by the muscle and will be benefit for the muscles. Growth hormones and growth factor will also be benefit for the muscles, but will have metabolic effects. Corticotrophin and their releasing factor will induce secretion of corticosterone by the cortex, inducing anti-inflammatory and antalgic effects. Chorionic gonadotrophin, lutein hormone and their releasing factor will have androgenic effects. Could it be clearer example than this of Lance Armstrong, disqualified in 2012 from all the results he obtained since 1998? Lance Armstrong finally admitted the use of EPO, one of the drugs most extensively used by his team, the US Postal Service's cycling team. Another example is this of Terry Newton in 2010. Terry Newton was a rugby league player, and he was the first case of growth hormone use resulting in an athlete sanction. Growth hormone was detected in a blood sample drawn out of competition, and Newton accepted the charge of doping. He was banned for 2 years, but he committed suicide during this period. The S3 group is the group of beta-2 agonists. Optimal sportive performance could only be achieved if your respiratory function is perfect. All these beta-2 agonists are potent bronchodilatators. Some of them, for example clenbuterol, also have metabolic effects. Therapeutic use exemption can be delivered to athletes suffering from asthma only for 3 products, salbutamol, formoterol, and salmeterol, if they are used by inhalation and with a maximum daily dose. As famous example, remember the Festina affair, in which Willy Voet, a Belgian soigneur, was implied. The car of Willy Voet was seized with several hundred grams of anabolic steroids, EPO, but also clenbuterol and other doping products. The Festina team had to leave the Tour de France on the 18th of July, 1998. The Spanish professional cyclist Alberto Contador was also tested positive for clenbuterol during the 2010 Tour de France, an event which he won. His victory was annulled, and he received a 2-year suspension of competition. But Contador's defense included the claim that his positive test was the consequence of contaminated meat in his diet. Hormone and metabolic modulators constitute the S4 group. Hormone and metabolic modulators are a diverse group of substances with diverse therapeutic uses. As doping agents, aromatase inhibitors will be benefit for males only. Selective estrogen receptor modulators, for example, tamoxifen, but also raloxifene or toremifene, will increase the secretion of testosterone, especially in male also. But by acting on receptor and on estrogen receptor, selective estrogen receptor modulators and other anti-estrogenic substances will also help to fight against the side effects of anabolic steroids. Myostatin inhibitors will be benefit for muscles, and metabolic modulators, including insulin, will help to improve the glucose uptake in the muscle and will also help to fight against the excessive catabolism due to an intensive training. Tamoxifen, a selective estrogen receptor modulator, was used by the Russian weightlifter Alexander Ivanov, who won the silver medal during the Olympic Games in London 2012. But further analysis showed he had used anabolic steroid and tamoxifen. About insulin, insulin was found in traces in a syringe seized in the hotel room of Marco Pantani in Monte Catini Terme during the Giro 2001. Marco Pantani already made speak about him because he used EPO during the Tour de France 1998. And a few years later, in 2004, he died in Rimini from an overdose of cocaine. Finally, the S5 group includes diuretics and masking agents. Use of diuretics by athletes is explained by the fact that they imagine that an increased urinary excretion rate will mask the use of doping products. Plasma expanders, for example glycerol, will mask the elevated red blood cell count induced by the use of EPO. And finally, some drugs, for example probenecid, which inhibit the urinary excretion of some drugs, and for example anabolic steroids. On July 2012, Franz Schleck was removed from the Tour de France after a sample returned traces of xipamide, a diuretic. The results were confirmed, and his team, the RadioShack Nissan team, suspended him. Stefano Garzelli, he won the 2000 Giro d'Italia, and he was recruited by the Italian super team Mapei Quick Step. But in 2002, during the same Giro d'Italia, he was caught in a doping scandal, and he was forced out of the race. He was tested positive for a masking agent, probenecid, and of course, he lost his contract with Mapei Quick Step. The second class of substances concerns substances that are prohibited in competition only. 4 classes are concerned: stimulants, narcotics, cannabinoids, and glucocorticoids. You can see on the slide a lot of products that belong to these 4 classes of prohibited substances. All of them will have psychoanaleptic effects. That means an increase in endurance, reduce in fatigue, improvement of euphoria and excitement. Some of them also have anti-inflammatory and antalgic effects. It's the case for narcotics, for example, buprenorphine, heroin, methadone, but also for glucocorticoids. Cannabinoids and glucocorticoids will also help bronchodilation. Remember the recent story of Charlene Van Snick in 2013. She won a bronze medal in August at the World Championship in Rio de Janeiro. But in October, it was announced that she was positive for cocaine in Rio, and she was banned for 2 years. But Charlene maintains her innocence, and on July 4, 2004, a sabotage was suggested, and the sanction was removed. In fact, the powder she used to prepare her energetic drink was contaminated with cocaine, cocaine probably added by someone else. The cobelge, widely used with the word of professional cycling, is a doping preparation for self-intramuscular injection, consisting of high concentration of amphetamine, but also heroin, a narcotic, cocaine, caffeine, or aspirin. Because of the negative impact of a photography showing Michael Phelps smoking marijuana at a party and published by a British newspaper, the USA Swimming decided to suspend him for 3 months in 2009 under its code of conduct. Finally, hackers have published papers demonstrating that Venus Williams has used a glucocorticoid, triamcinolone, for 3 years, from 2010 to 2013. But she explained that she obtained a therapeutic use exception because she suffered from a Bougereau-Sjögren syndrome. The last category of substances is that of substances prohibited in particular sports only. It is alcohol and beta blockers. Alcohol is prohibited in motorcycling, archery, air sports, and automobile if blood alcohol concentration is higher than 0.1 gram per liter, because consumption of alcohol induces serious consequences, not just for the athletes, but also for fellow competitors and spectators. The doping effect of alcohol is the attenuation of anxiety level. Beta blockers can induce a reduction of hand tremor and of anxiety level. They are thus inhibited in archery, automobile, billiard, golf, shooting, skiing and snowboarding, and also underwater sport. Surprisingly, the first athlete having been disqualified at the Olympics for drug use was disqualified because of alcohol consumption. But it was in 1968, when the Swedish pentathlete Hans-Gunnar Liljenvall was controlled positive for alcohol. He reported he had 2 beers to calm his nerves because the pistol shot him even. During the 2008 Beijing Olympic Games, the North Korean shooter Kim Yong-soo was expelled from the Games after tested positive for a beta blocker, propranolol. Before to conclude, it's also necessary to remember that near to these performance-enhancing effects, all these chemicals can also have side effects that will affect the brain or the body. For example, anabolic agents, beta-2 agonists, metabolic modulators, stimulants, narcotics, and cannabinoids can have psychiatric and behavioral effects. They can induce mental confusion, aggressiveness, addiction, or anxiety. Anabolic agents, aromatase inhibitors, and anti-estrogenic substances can alter the endocrine reproductive function and induce hypogonadotrophy or menopausal symptoms. Osteoporosis can be due to the use of aromatase inhibitors or glucocorticoids, and myostatin inhibitors can have negative effect on tendons. Gastrointestinal effect, for example, nausea, vomiting, but also hepatocellular necrosis, cholestasis or hypoglycemia, can be induced by the use of anabolic agents, growth hormones and growth factors, and masking agents. Anabolic agents, EPO receptor agonists, beta-2 agonists, diuretics, and stimulants can increase cardiovascular effects, cardiomyopathy, hypertension, heart palpitation, tachycardia, thromboembolism, and hypokalemia. And finally, the use of corticotrophin and releasing factor can decrease the muscle protein synthesis, and the use of HIF stabilizers and activators can boost cancer progression. To conclude, let's say that the question of enhancing performance in sport has become part of a broader societal debate on human enhancement. In the contemporary medicine, the new medicine technologies can be used not only to cure the patients, but also to enhance human capacities. Competitive sport could become the main laboratory of enhancement medicine. The last words are from Ben Jonson in the Ben Jonson story. Everybody wants an edge. Everybody wants to win. That's the way it is. That is the sport. I thank you for your attention.